We are rolling.
All right. Bubba Ray, you ready?
We are rolling.
Richard, thank you so much for joining us today. And I know initially you were probably suspect as to who the hell are these guys. But I know that we've been thinking and seeing Bud and Mary's Marina here for the last 35 years and seeing and hearing about you and your family and what you've done with the daytime sword fishing. And I know that you got a huge passion for bonefish. And we are here to say hello and have you tell us your story. And I guess the opening question is, wow.
Well, Andy, thank you so much. I consider it a privilege to be here today and to be able to tell you my story. And you mentioned 35 years, when in truth, Bud Mary's goes back to 1945, which is a long time. Actually, this year we're kind of celebrating our 75th year, of which I've been here for 42, but I actually started fishing here 52 years ago. So I don't know where you really want to start.
I want to start with a question.
Okay.
How did you get into fishing? Was your dad into fishing? I mean, what?
No, my dad got seasick. He was what I call a spiritual giant. He came from poverty in Detroit and managed to work his way up to becoming a world champion weightlifter. He actually won the Olympics in 1948 and 1952.
Wow.
And 6 world championships, and had quite a war record.
Right.
Yeah.
And he
fought World War II?
He did, in the Philippines. Yes. Yeah.
Where are those Olympic medals?
Well, actually, if you look over there, you'll see me, and that was done recently when they held the games in London again. But, you really have to realize when he went over in 1948, there hadn't been Olympics prior to that time.
Right.
Because of Hitler and World War II.
Right.
And, the idea of them all going over on a ship. And the one thing my father hated about the whole thing was he got seasick. So he never became a fisherman. But I guess if you want to know, I will tell you how I started fishing. My grandfather was a major influence in my life. And my first, remembrance of fishing actually came, I was from St. Louis, Missouri. I must have been, 3, 4 years old, 5 years old, whatever. And the story goes, my grandfather took me to a lake. And, of course, you guys are fly fishermen, but they use bobbers, bobbers. And I was so young, they wouldn't let me use a mechanical rod. So they gave me a cane pole and a bobber. And I remember there's a catwalk, and everybody's fishing, and I was watching my bobber, on the wrong side of the dock in the lily pads, and I caught a bass. And my grandfather paraded me around with the bass, showing me and the bass off. And I think it was the first time I ever got any merit and recognition, in life, how you want that. That's why people do what they do.
Sure.
I'm sure that's why you skied, and I'm sure that's why you're doing your podcast here and the things you love. So that's how it started. And the truth of the matter is, my grandfather played a huge role in my life and continued to. He would visit Florida twice a year, come in a month, and he's a reasonably wealthy man. Came in March and November. And every day I'd be in grade school, and he'd be sitting there in the car. He'd be waiting for me. He'd pick me up, and we'd fish after school. We'd fish on weekends. And that's pretty much, how my passion for fishing started. I was really lucky because about 1957, I guess maybe before that, 55 actually, we moved to a house on a canal. And it's funny, I was mentioning to your dad, this is my beginnings right there. That's me. And that's a 8-foot pram. And it's that engine's not I have the engine. I actually lost that engine on another one. It was a 1938 Evinrude.
Wow.
And that was a Biscayne canal. And I ventured down the canal and eventually out into the bay, and eventually from the bay out into the ocean, and eventually to the Bahamas.
I want to ask you about that. That was going to be my next question. So I was reading an article, I don't know where, but the article said that you got your first boat when you were 15 or something, and you weren't allowed. You were going out of Haulover Inlet, right? And you saw this great big expansion of water, but you weren't allowed to go out there. And then what did you do? You took a big run somewhere?
Well, the truth is this. That was my first boat, and I worked my way up to a fibercraft. And my grandfather bought boats that he kept behind our house on the canal. This particular boat was a 21-foot fibercraft with a 80 horsepower Volvo, inboard, outboard. As a matter of fact, the manager of the Marina, who's 2 years younger than me, who's not here, Billy, he just left. I guess he was 13, I was 15. We had another young man with us, Tommy Penland. And honest to God, I did not know the island of Bimini was inhabited. This is true. And we went over to Baker's Haulover, and there was a guy, I remember his name was Stoney. And we asked him how to get to Bimini. And the man looked at me and he said, "You see the compass?" He said, "Just keep it on E." And my first trip to Bimini was like that. And my parents did not know I was going in the ocean in that 21-footer yet. I pulled up on the beach in Bimini.
Alone?
With my two friends. I didn't know there was the inlet, that there was a difference between South and North Bimini. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I heard actually calypso music, and I saw people, and they said, "Well, you can't dock here. The waves will beat you to death." It was in front of what they called the old Pines area there. So we went around, went to Brown's Dock, and that was my beginning of a love affair with the island of Bimini.
Unbelievable.
Which played a big role in my life. And before we started the podcast, I had mentioned to your dad that there were a lot of his serendipitous, the right word, meetings and just chance meetings with people, which, as if you want to hear all this story, we'll get into them gradually.
Well, when people hear the name Richard Stanczyk, they think of Swordfish. They think of Bud and Mary's, and they think of Swordfish. But many people don't realize or didn't know that you had a love affair with bonefish.
I did.
And big bonefish, right? Back in the day.
I've had a love affair with Warsaw groupers. I've had a love affair with sailfish. I've had a love affair with blue marlin. I've had a love affair with snook.
But was bonefish your first?
No. My first was a little bass I told you about. But listen, I have a love affair with fish. And, right now, for instance, at this age, I got a lot of guides that kind of beat me up because I go out there 3 or 4 afternoons a week. And, I don't know if you're aware of it, but our habitat here has completely been damaged severely. And I don't want to get into this. But the truth of the matter is the bonefish disappeared about, 15 years ago or more. And, as so often in my life, I was blessed and able to reinvent myself with swordfish. But what I do now, because I don't swordfish any longer, my son has now taken that over, I go out 4 afternoons and I stake up what we call deadboat. And I put lines in the water and I take different friends and a lot of people who've never caught fish, and I treat them to the excitement of a screaming drag with a bonefish on the end. And I tell them the same thing. I can't guarantee a fish, but I guarantee a beautiful sunset. So there's a few guides around, not as many as there used to be, who are sophisticated, and they really beat me up about this stake-up bonefishing. I have a line for them. I always tell them the same thing. Anybody can catch a bonefish when you see them. I catch them without seeing them. So this is the way I deal with this. But I spent 20-some years of my life with a fly rod in a boat and never put bait in it. The boat I used was a 1955 Nova Scotia, before all the fancy boats. There's a picture of it up there, and that's Kenny Knutson and myself.
Okay.
And I guess I had 2 claims to fame in the bonefish world. I think it was 1987. I did win the fly bonefish tournament, and I also that year I was the guide to the world record bonefish on a fly rod.
And that was 14 pounds 6 ounces.
It was. It's that fish right there.
Wow. And
here's the deal. I fished with Vic Gaspenny for 51 years, 52 now. And the deal was he would pull me around right before the tournament, and I'd pull him around the rest of the year. So he ended up with a world record, and I ended up as the guide. You got time for a little funny story?
Yeah,
sure.
Funny story.
Always.
So anyway, many years ago, I met, and I call her, that's that picture, the first lady in fly fishing. And
that's Joan Wolfe.
She is. And unless you've met Joan, I don't know, how I would describe her other than regal, an amazing person, amazing character. I had the pleasure of fishing with her. The first time I went fishing with Joan, she came with a well-known newscaster from who was an anchor woman, And the two of them got on the boat, and this is before I got into the fly fishing heavy. And it was interesting because she wanted to catch saltwater fish with cobia, sailfish, kingfish, barracudas, things like that. So we went out. And what was funny, my brother was running the boat. This was my brother Scott, who's about 13 years younger and has run the Catch-22 for 40 years. And I remember standing there, and I looked at her, and my brother's in the bridge, and we're going to go catch bait, and we're going to chum with some live bait, and Joan's going to cast in there and try to catch a big barracuda to start. So I proceeded to tell her how to cast. I don't know her.
Yeah.
She jumped up on the gunnel. Now, realize she was a young woman then in her 60s. Jumped up on the gunnel and I guess threw a cast about 100 feet. And I looked at my brother, and he looked at me. And that was my beginnings with Joan Wolfe. And also my beginnings with fly fishing were starting then as well. Well, years later, we were out in the mackerel grounds. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of Joan with a mackerel somewhere too. So at this point, she had never seen me cast a fly rod. And we're mackerel fishing, and her husband was a dear friend as well, catching mackerel. So I decided to pick up the rod, and I'm, trying to cast for the mackerels and what have you. And I'm catching them and doing real well. And she looked at me in a very serious voice and said, Richard, if you had some lessons, you could be good at this. I didn't want to tell her that I had already won that doggone fly bonefish tournament and caught, this kind of stuff. But the only reason I won the fly bonefish tournament was because of the guide. He had to put me 30 feet in front of the fish straight downwind, and that was Kenny Knutson. But there was something else about this. I did not want to win with Steve Huff or Al Pulaski or Eddie Whiteman or those guys. Kenny Knutson had never caught a bonefish on a fly rod, but he was the hardest working
prior
guy.
to this tournament.
Never has still, I don't think, himself. So I took great pride, I guess, in having won that. It was luck. But I also knew a lot about fishing and bone fishing, and we worked together on it,
Sure. But you were speaking earlier about your relationship with Steve Huff goes back a long way.
Well, it's kind of funny. I almost wish I would have brought it. We went to North Miami Junior High School, and there's a little yearbook called The Tiger Tail. So I was a kid with a boat, and Steve and I were in the same class, and we walked from North Miami Junior High School about 2.5 miles. And we started fishing together. I may very well have been the first person to ever take him out in a boat.
And how many years ago is this now?
Well, let's see. I'm 76, 75.
60.
This would have been...
a little over 60 years ago?
Yeah, 12 years old, 13 years old.
Yeah.
So I remember going out the canal, which is Biscayne Canal. If you turn to the right, there was a little area, and there was some tarpon that used to hang out in there. Took me a long time to catch one of those. I actually had to jump in the water with the first tarpon I ever caught at that age and swim under a dock because I was using a bait reel with a Zara spook.
Oh, that's funny.
I don't know if you know what this is.
Yeah, sure.
But anyway, that's and then I never saw Steve again until I got to the Keys, and then I saw his name and realized, that he was this really
Who he was, yeah.
well done, famous, fisherman. But he's also like Joan Wolfe, a real gentleman, and. I fished 4 times in that tournament. I came in second 3, and then I won. I think the best thing about it was I felt that beating him, to beat him was really saying something.
It for sure.
Yeah, yes.
What kind of a kid was he back then?
Quiet.
Do you remember?
Very quiet, very shy. Just a more of a straightforward kid. I was the opposite. I was a kid that went to Bimini when he was 15 in a 21-foot boat.
So there's another story that I heard. I heard you went out offshore fishing before the high school prom or the morning of the high school prom, and you hooked into what happened?
Well, I'm going to show you this. This you got to see this. This was my first wife, and she was beautiful. She became a fashion model. This is at Pier 5. This is not the fish. This is me when I was young. I had actually at that time. I think it was in that same boat. It was a high school prom, and we'd rented a limo. I was parking cars at the Fontainebleau and had some connections, and we were going to go to the prom, and make a big deal, and then go to the Fontainebleau afterwards. And I said to her, "Listen, I'm going to go out fishing, and I'm going to fish from daybreak till noon, no problem. I'll be in time." So
trust me.
Yeah, trust me. So we're off the sea buoy in Government Cut, and using a 6.0 reel in those days with linen line, and I had never caught a big blue marlin, and a big blue marlin came up. The fish, we hooked them. We didn't. We fought it 8 hours, something like that. We were off Pompano. I can't even remember the name of the inlet, but we had run out of. I had put peanut butter on my face. I was sunburned, beat to death. We came in the inlet, ran out of gas, drifted into a seawall. People came down, thought we were. Well, they would have thought we were from Cuba, but they weren't coming over yet, and they didn't know what we were. And I called my dad, and contacted of course, my girlfriend, and spoiled the whole thing. And I actually wrote a pretty good story. I've never written anything in my life except that story. I wrote that story, and in the end, I said I lost a girl, but I still have the memory of the fish.
Sure. And how big was that fish?
I would, I became obsessed with blue marlins, and
After that,
oh my God, well,
or before?
it took me a while to catch my first big one, but yeah, that fish was probably in the 500-pound range. So
Right offshore of Miami.
yeah, they used to
Wow.
live there back then. They still do occasionally. Yeah, and I spent I don't know 8 or 10 years traveling. That boat you see in up above, that yellow boat, is my boat, my brother, and we for years and years and years we traveled with the kids, and we had a boat before that, same thing. And so I spent a lot of time in the Bahamas and traveling down Turks and Caicos, and fishing for blue marlin.
So how did the sword fishing come about? I mean, you were a huge pioneer in innovating daytime sword fishing. I mean, was it primarily nighttime sword fishing before that?
Yeah, we can go to that part of the story.
Let's wait for a second.
You want
Okay.
to? You want to? Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Pier 5, because that was in the
Yeah.
early years when you
Yeah,
first started
that,
really getting connected with the
yeah.
big boats in the offshore world,
Yeah.
and the players up at Pier 5 were very, very famous offshore
They were.
captains.
They were. Actually, interestingly enough, I graduated at the University of Miami, as my son Nick did, with an accounting degree. I had, I had a 21 fiber craft that my grandfather had, and then I got a 23-foot formula, and I got a 29-foot carry. It's a long story how all those boats came about. The carry was fast. It had two 440 Chryslers in it, 330 horsepower. I had a custom-built tower, which was today what you call an express boat. So it wasn't unusual for me to run back and forth to Bimini every weekend. And that's when I began to understand blue marlin and catch blue marlin. So somehow in this whole configuration, and this is a strange story, my grandfather insisted, and remember I go back to the grandfather who provided me with boats and provided me with money for my college education. He insisted I go to college, so I did, and I got this accounting degree, and I practiced. I was with a public accounting firm, 24 guys, We audited banks, and one of the banks we were audited was over there in Jefferson National Bank, right near the charter boat docks up in, what do you call Sunny Isles. So I hated it. I didn't like accounting. And I had an opportunity, and I did. I had an opportunity to get a hold of a bar and restaurant. And I quit my accounting job, broke my mother's heart when I called her and told her I was quitting. And actually, the partners loved me too. They hated it. So I went into the restaurant bar business. I was 22 when I got my first liquor license. And I had a friend named Bob Lewis, who I knew through bowling, because my parents were in the bowling alley business. Now, Bob Lewis would be in the Hall of Fame, and he's the guy who did the kites.
Sure.
And he fished at Pier 5. He was a motorcycle cop, and he fished at Pier 5 when all the great ones were there, Buddy Carey, guys like that. And, Vince Spaulding and all the Spaulding brothers and sons. So for me, the idea of ever getting to Pier 5, was just some kind of a dream. I remember being in Bimini with my friend Charlie Cluck and walking down to Bimini Big Game Club dock and seeing Rivoviches and Merritts. And I don't know if these things mean anything, but these were high-end boats that wealthy people had in those days before they were traveling to the Virgin Islands, and God, now they go all over the world. And Charlie looked at me and said, "Richard, the closest you'll ever come to heaven is in the top of one of those towers." So this was me. This was my passion, what I wanted. Anyway, Bob Lewis, my father knew him through the bowling because Bob bowled in a league. My dad was in the bowling business. And I decided that I wanted to buy a charter boat. I'm going to back this up because this is funny. the first big blue marlin, and I don't think I got a picture of that here that I ever caught. Oh, there it is. Okay, I'm going to back this up.
Yeah, sure.
Well, that's my friend Charlie. That's the dock in Bimini. And that's me. Okay.
Wow.
And that's 1967. So what ended up happening was funny. I ended up in Bimini all the time, and I had that boat, and there was a woman who was an exotic dancer that would come from Nassau. And she was a fire swallower and quite an entertainer. And she had a girlfriend named Nurse Johnson, who was the nurse that was on Bimini. So she would come there. So I used to drink in all the local places like the Calypso Club, Brown's Bar, and the Big Game Club. And it was paradise for me as a young man. And I knew this woman. So they talked me into fishing in a tournament with them. It was a native tournament. Anyway, the long and short is we hooked a blue marlin. We were actually, like this one, trolling a big bonefish. We fought it for 6 or 7 hours. I had a Bahamian mate named Percy Dotton. God rest his soul. He died in Nassau. And we had several shots with the flying gaff, missed him, and lost the fish. Well, this plays into how I got here. And the way I got here, in those days, I drank a lot. And I was so upset. I drank so much that I passed out, and I was laying on one of those docks. And about 1 a.m, a fellow by the name of Harold Adler, this goes into the chance meeting, came and shook me and said, "Are you all right?" I had no shirt on. In those days, I could go with no shirt. I kind of woke up terribly hungover and still inebriated. And he invited me down on a boat. It was the Kalex, which in those days was not that Kalex, which was Alex Adler. It was an old Enterprise that he'd brought down from New York. So anyway, that was how I met Harold Adler. And about a year later, he had contracted with Jimmy Albright, who was a fishing captain guide here, one of the most famous names in sport fishing, who fished out of the Keys here, out of this marina, to run his offshore boat, which was the old Kalex. I had never fished for sailfish down here. Harold called me and said, "My boat blew a riser. Could you bring your boat down?" This was a 29-footer with the inboards and the tower. I said, "Sure, I'll bring that down and we'll fish." Charlie helped me bring the boat down. I remember there was no GPS. We actually stopped and pulled in near the shore in Tavernier, and I had him wade in to see where we were. And we came to Bud and Mary's. That was my first experience in 1970, I think it was. So Jimmy ran the boat. I mated. It was the first time I ever saw double lines put in mono. It was the first time I ever saw mono leaders for sailfish. It was the first time for a lot of things, little tiny gold finno reels. And we won the tournament, 1970. Jimmy Albright, Harold Adler is the angler. Alex was about 12. So this is how I first came to Bud Mary's, which was 1970. And of course, through a series of lucky breaks, I managed to get money together to buy the place in 1978. The other thing I'm going to tell you, and this is important to me while we're telling all this boat right here. Now this backs up a little bit.
The Primo Donna.
Yeah. Well, the boat used to be called the Rerun, and Captain Bob Lewis ran that for James Knight from the Miami Herald, Knight Ritter. So I'm through this stage with the carry boat and fishing here and back in Miami and out of accounting and still have the bar business and a restaurant, and I'm doing tax returns at night. And Bob Lewis, I go down to Pier 5 with Charlie Cluck, and I meet Buddy Carey, and I'm standing there in awe. These guys are legends. And Bob Lewis is the reason I went down there. He said, Mr. Knight's going to sell his boat, and it would make an ideal charter boat. So I went down there, and I saw the boat, and Mr. Knight wanted to meet me. I had no idea who James Knight was, and he wants me to come to the Herald building. I go down there, and Captain Lewis, Bob, takes me down, and I wait for this guy, and comes in khaki clothes, and kind of like this place. He's got pictures of Chub Key and Marlin, and he was one of the founders of the Crown Colony. And just like I'm talking now, I sit down, and I want to buy this boat. I don't even have half the money to buy the boat. And the half I got to borrow from Charlie's mother. Anyway, the long and short is I tell my stories. He knows who I am, and growing up on the canal and Bimini and whole 9 yards. And I walk out really dejected. A day later, I got a call from his secretary. I never saw the man again. "Mr. Knight wants you to have the boat. He's going to put it in Tommy's boatyard." Captain Lewis going to put it in first rate shape for you. And I get a chill when I tell the story because there's a lot of these little moments in my life. So that was my charter boat. I had it for about 6 or 7 years. It was funny. I docked right next to Buddy Carey, and I became very close friends with his son Mike, who's passed away. And Mike Carey and a guy named Billy Harrison are going to play a big role in this, which I hope I'm not taking up too much time.
No,
Not at all.
But I want to get to the whole thing. So I think some of the best days of my life were running that boat. I had a bar business. It was docked across the street from a fashion college, and there was a bar at the end of the dock. And
it was perfect.
how much better could it get? So as a matter of fact, that young lady right there went to that fashion college. Anyway, as things would have it, we'll get to this now. In 1977, or this might have been 76, Mike Carey and Billy Harrison, along with two guys that owned Fluker Taxidermy at the time, Jerry and Jesse Webb, came up with this idea that we're going to try to catch a swordfish off Miami. Now, there's a reason that happened, and the reason was Billy spoke Spanish. And we used to buy our bait down in the Miami River at a bait house, and suddenly they started noticing these swordfish bills in the corner. So one day, Billy and Mike, the captain of the other sea boots, his father ran a big sea boots, comes and tells me this story, and they didn't have any tackle. They had some, but I had big tackle because I fished the Bahamas. So I lent them a pair of my 80s. I probably could have been on the boat this night, by the way, but I stopped to have a drink in a bar, not with that girl, with another. So I missed the boat, and about 3 a.m, I get a call from Mike, come down to the dock. I come down to the dock, and there's 2 300-pound swordfish laying there.
Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, that opened up the floodgates to sword fishing.
Right. Did they have an idea about how to catch a swordfish, or were they kind of guessing? Or
they did.
And where'd they get that information
from Cubans.
Okay.
In 1960, all the Cubans that fished, commercial fishermen that left Cuba, migrated here, and they all wound up the fishermen around the Miami River, which was the hub of commercial and what have you. It's not that way any longer. Where those things are now, if you went up there, you'll see high rises and stuff.
Right.
But again, this is way back then. So that's where they got the idea. And in those days, they went out and they used these silooms, which are little chemical sticks that you burn. So
you talk about the floodgates.
Well, the floodgates were this. I'm going to ignore that. I'd been running a charter boat, and this was a funny story. Buddy Carey was my neighbor right next to me, the boat next to me. And he took a liking to me. He always used to give me a lot of parties to take fishing, his overflow. And I could never really figure that out because, he's a legend and I'm just starting out. And I'm thinking the guy really likes me this much, and I think he did. But one day, Kenny Spaulding, who works here, he's 84, by the way, comes up and says, "You know why he gave you those trips?" I said, "No." He says, "Because you're not going to catch anything. You'll get them all back." I don't know if that makes it. If you're in a charter business, you get this. But what I did, I worked at the Fontainebleau growing up when I was 16. And when you work parking cars at the Fontainebleau, that's a world unto itself. I always said I learned, I got my formal education at the University of Miami. My real education came there.
Your street education.
It did. We won't get into that. But anyway, as a result of knowing this, I was able to really produce a tremendous amount of business through hotels for Pier 5 and helped a lot of people out. And in turn, these people helped me. They showed me where all the wrecks were, because I don't know if you know about fishing wrecks. These are called fads.
Yep.
Fish aggregating devices. And Kenny Spaulding, who's again with me now and still works here, he's 84, and his brother, but his father, Vince, was the one, along with Al Pfluger, his father, not the kid. They began to put these fads out there off Miami, and at one time, I had 40 of them committed to memory. Now, in those days, we didn't have the GPS. GPS can make a fisherman on anybody overnight. In those days, you had ranges and depths, and you line things up, and that's how you got there. So one of my other claims to fame, they pretty much, by 1970-something, wiped out the Warsaw grouper population. And I'm coming home one day, and I got my old paper machine on, and I found a wreck in 468 feet of water way down off the buoy off of Elliott's Key. And it killed the guys at Pier 5 because I could catch Warsaws at will. They live a long time and they're big. So I caught 130 Warsaw groupers when nobody else could catch them, until finally my friends went out there with an airplane and a small boat and caught me on the spot and wiped it out. But it was one of my, I got these little claims to fame.
Did that put you on the map?
It did in that little microcosm of
Right.
people. But I can't tell you what it was like, to drop a whole barracuda down or a whole Almaco jack and put a guy in a chair with a wire line and pull away and watch
Watch
this
it get
300-pound
tight.
Warsaw. And I have, I have a lot of, I don't think I put the pictures of the Warsaws in there, but anyway, that was, when I told you that I have reinvented myself, and when you ask me what fish, all through my life, I've been able to do that. So, Warsaw groupers, what ended up happening, this is me. This is the tournament, the first annual tournament. I caught those 2 fish. I actually caught 3. And I thought I died and gone to heaven. I'm getting paid a lot of money to go out there and drift around at night. Don't tell anybody this because I'm a boat captain. We could actually drink while we were drifting around and catch these big fish. I don't know how this, but anyway, the long and short, what ended up happening then, somebody dangled a carrot in front of me, money, and I left, and I moved to Alaska. And
Really?
Yeah.
To do what?
Go into mining business.
You left fishing to go mining.
Yeah. And
What was that like?
it was like
That
hell.
was a hell of a transition.
Well, I'm gonna tell you. Part of it was trying to get my first wife back. Her brother-in-law and other people needed money. I had some money by then. We went up there, and I invested. I actually lived on the mine site. We'd fly from Anchorage and had an apartment and went back and forth. And what ended up happening is I didn't get the wife back. And we sold out, and I did get some money, and I came back.
How long did that transition
Not
last?
long.
Pretty-
Not long.
it
I
was
was up
pretty-
there for 6 months. They had terrible rules. I lived in a
No drinking.
I was living in a plywood shack with visqueen top, and I'm afraid of guns, and I don't like bears, and I had a dog that was with us. They got hit with a porcupine. They had to put it to sleep, a big German Shepherd, and there were no women and there was no drinking, and I didn't make it. Yeah,
I'm surprised you lasted that long.
I did. So anyway, I had to come back, and I did, and one thing led to the next.
Yeah, so now you're into sword fishing and doing it successfully.
Well, I did the nighttime sword fishing.
Right.
Then I had this hiatus, and then this is 1978. I come here and I get this again amazing chance to buy this, which all goes back to, remember when I told you I fished here in a sailfish tournament?
Yes.
I met the owner of this place.
Right.
This is another funny story. His name was Jack Kurtz. Very shifty character. Loved to fish. Again, I didn't have enough money, so I come down here and I'm looking at this place and I thought, man, what would it be like to own this? So I asked Jack about it, and Jack said, "Oh my God, Richard, I just sold it." So I go back to Miami, and I get a phone call from Jack. This is about a month, 2 months later, and he says to me, "You know what? The guy has put money in escrow, I think it was then. Can't come up with the money. I'm going to reduce it. If you still want it, give me a down payment. I'll hold the paper, and I'll sell you Bud Mary's." And that's how it happened.
Wow.
And I ended up with Bud Mary's. I was in over my head too. Trust me when I
I was
tell you
just going to
that.
ask.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
what? Be careful
Well-
what you wish for. You may get it.
Yeah, and
Were you overwhelmed at that time
uh,
once you got it?
no, because I was still drinking. So
You didn't know what was happening?
Nah.
It was all good. You were rolling.
No, I hate. Yeah, I don't want. I do not. I don't. We're going to get to that part of the story. So anyway, yes, I buy Bud Mary's, and by then, remember, the sword fishing. What ended up happening with the sword fishing? The longliners got wind of it, and they moved into the Straits of Florida, and they
Decimated.
devastated.
Yeah.
destroyed the sword fishing. I came down here, and all of a sudden I got in a skiff. I remember doing that. I was with a guy named John Kipp. We were in a Mako, and another guy. What was that? Oh, Sonny. They're And we went out to the Swash. You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
And I had my first encounter with a bonefish. And I remember they were pushing. We were trying to pull. The water got too shallow. They were out. They got out of the boat. I'm using bait then, and they're pushing it through the mud. And the bonefish went in the ditch and came up on the flat over there. And I jumped off the boat and swam across and waded up, and I actually caught this bonefish. And I became obsessed with bonefish, as I were with Warsaw groupers and all these other fish.
But also
in my
too,
life.
now it might be the hunting aspect that you were enthralled with. You see the fish, and now you can
Absolutely, yeah.
chase them.
Yeah. So I became obsessed with bonefish. Now there were fish parallel lives, that I'll get to, but yeah, I had I don't know how many years, 20-something years of bone fishing, and what happened is after pulling around on bait, I discovered you could catch them with a fly rod. So my friend Vic Gaspenny, and there's a picture up there. He and I, that one's in here. This was the thing that this right here. So anyway, I was always innovative, always figuring things out, which you'll hear about when you get into the sword fishing. And one of the things we did, remember I told you, did I tell you that I didn't have any fly casting lessons, and
Yep.
I had to be 30 feet in front of the fish. I had one other secret weapon. This was before they came out with all the fancy flies. People hadn't really gotten into it. So I knew a woman named Millie who made Millie bucktails.
Sure.
Knew her well because I bought all the bucktails from her husband. So Vic and I sat down, and I didn't tie flies, but he could. And we designed a fly. It was brown, had a bucktail type tail, and it had a little wedge head. And it was a fly that wouldn't go to the bottom. It would stay suspended, so to speak. It was so deadly that when it hit, they would hit it. They would run to it. It was, I don't know if it was the sound, but also as you stripped it, it had that little.
And they dip.
So I was smart enough to figure out you needed a fly on hard bottom, you need a fly in the middle, and these 9-mile fish and these giant fish, they wanted that fly, and you get it near them, and they're going to eat it. So the fly helped. I had the fly. I knew how to tie the knots, and I told you the story. We decided to enter the fly bowfish tournament. In those days, there were 25 guys, man, and they knew what they were doing, and they were good guides. And you had to stand up the whole time. I will tell you that the year I won, I had a hangover one day and didn't fish one day.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, that was terrible. Yeah, I didn't get sober till, I'll get into that, 1990. So, yeah, it was a real long shot that Richard would win.
But you did.
I did. And I can tell you, the one fish I always remember, Kenny was there. It was dead low tide. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There was no way in the world to catch a fish. And there was a spot right behind the marina called the Pilings. And I had my magic fly, and it was blowing. And there were big, giant mud and fish about 3 or 4 feet deep. And I managed to get the fly in with them. And I stripped it, and I heard the knot hit. The knot hit the last guide, and I did this and hooked that fish, and he ran out in the pilings where all the lobsters were, traps and stuff. And I remember catching that thing, and I got my name's in there. So that was my my fly tournament stuff, and it is one of the most important things in my life. I'll never forget it, the thrill of it. But something happened. I told your dad this before we started taping. I really didn't belong on the bow of the boat. I mean, I belonged there catching fish, but I belonged pulling the boat or running the boat and catching fish for people.
You had more joy in seeing an angler be successful.
Absolutely. Which is, when you saw me in a charter business, that's what I was doing.
Right.
And I've been doing that all my life.
Did tarpon ever come into play? Because for so many people, it was the tarpon.
I was bonefish.
But you were a bone fisherman, and the antithesis of a bonefish is what was happening out there in 1,700 feet of water.
Yeah, but the bonefishing. Also, I had a love affair with Andros Island. I had a place over there for 25 years, and at that time, I used to fly back and forth. So I saw bonefishing in Andros when I was the only guy there. I fished all over the Bahamas, so I was obsessed with bone fishing. I mean, obsessed. And I knew. I mean, I've caught them in muds. I've caught them tailing. I caught them cruising. I've caught them. just about. As a matter of fact, if you look up there, you see that picture of me. There's that world record bonefish, and right above it is me and my guide James.
Yeah.
He lived to be 100 also, and I can remember getting in the boat with James in Andros, and that was an aluminum boat. We would start at daybreak, and in those days they used a push pole with a little prong on one end and a point on the other. And as we pulled all our way back, it's 30 miles through that bight, James would see a conch. He'd say, "Boss, can I put the conch in the boat?" "Yes, James." "Driftwood." "Boss, can I have it?" "Yes." "Sponges?" "Yes." Funniest story ever. We're pulling along. I shouldn't tell this one maybe, because I wouldn't do this, and I shouldn't have done it. But he saw a turtle. And, of course, I had to camp over there, and I was practically part of their family. So anyway, we see this turtle, and James says, "Boss, can I get that turtle?" James is in his 70s, and the turtle, when you get near him, is going to take off. I never in my life ever thought that he would get this turtle. I said, "Yeah, go ahead, get the turtle, James." Well, what I didn't know, he started the darn boat up, just drove around until the turtle popped up, picked it up, and put it in the boat. And I had piles of stuff with the turtle upside down. I'm looking at his eyes, and he's snapping at my heels, and I'm going, "Oh, my God, what have I done?" I'm going to tell you another story, and this is a true story. I had bought a boat for Nick, and this is when the bonefish left.
Nick's your son.
My son. And I was coming back from out in the Gulf out here, and I'm in this catamaran, which is this is an old catamaran, World Cat with a tower. We're coming through the Twin Key markers, and I see, because I don't know if you understand this, but years ago, as the cold fronts approach, when the mackerel time comes, the bonefish move. And they move from 9 Mile and all these areas, and they move in a bunch, and they go out to the ocean. They also do it to spawn. And I saw something that I don't know if anybody would ever believe me, but I saw it. I saw this massive bonefish. At first, I thought it was mullet. It was bonefish. And I watched dolphin, porpoises, circle them. And the same thought come to my mind. How can a porpoise catch a bonefish? Well, I watched how. They just drove them till they couldn't swim, and they ate them at will. And I think that, in addition to obviously the destruction of the habitat, is one of the things that contributed to the bonefish
decline
disappearing out of Alamrata. So I wasn't going to get into that, but I did witness it. Geez, I'm talking a lot here.
It's good. That's what we
No.
want you
Are
to
you all right
do.
with all this?
No, keep
This is
going. We love
awesome.
it.
All right. So anyway, I wanted to get Andros and the Bahamas in and the bonefish again, because it's not like I just fished
Right.
that one tournament.
No, it's
The reason I was able to win the tournament was because my understanding of bonefish, knowing where they're at, body language, there's tricks, and I could do all that. I just couldn't cast a fly rod. But, I was, with Kenny's help, we did that.
So you're buying a boat for your son now.
Well,
Bonefish had gone away. You're coming in off the Gulf.
No, I did buy a boat for my son when he turned 15. I bought quite a few boats, but Nick and Ricky, that's kind of, we get to that part, but I think you're wanting to get to the swordfish. So
There we go. Yeah.
let's get to it.
Yeah.
And again, I showed you, where I fished in the first tournament in 1977, and I had I have obsessions with all these fish, and of course sword fishing was there. I came down here 1978. I got into several things. One was bone fishing, the other was fishing in Mexico for sailfish, and going to the Bahamas and fishing for blue marlin. So all this was going on. But as I mentioned, the longliners had moved into the Straits of Florida and wiped out the swordfish. So around the year 2000, I think it was 9/11. You all remember that. This place was silent. Nothing was going on. There was a guy by the name of Dr. Reuben Hines, and I've got a letter from him in there. No, it's in my other book. And actually, Dr. Hines had really discovered swordfish off Venezuela, okay, and had caught them in the daytime. We did not discover daytime sword fishing. We imported it.
Oh, from Venezuela.
Right. But now, understand, in Venezuela, it's 800 feet deep and there's no current. Out here, it's
Much different.
1,700 feet deep and a 3-knot current, which
Right.
I'll get into a little of that as well. So anyway, 9/11 comes along. We got nothing to do. They had finally passed legislation to keep the swordfish out of the straits, the longliners. So my brother, myself, Vic Gaspenny decide, let's go out and see if we can catch a swordfish at night, because maybe they're coming back. So I go out there at night, and for a couple of years, when I say I get obsessed with something, I get obsessed. I'm out there 3 nights a week, and we're the first guys to, start using live bait for them. We're catching them in good numbers, but we're not catching big ones. We're catching little juvenile fish. So after a couple of years of that, it finally comes to me that if these fish are here during the daytime or nighttime, they got to be here during the day. But how are we going to catch these things? They're 1,500 feet down. So what happened was we decided to go out. There's a picture of a guy named Max Mayfield over there. He was a director of the National Hurricane Center. He's holding that big permit with me. Well, Max got me maps, which are like bathymetric charts. So I looked at it, and knowing what I do know about fish, a lot of fish, have sensors, and they travel on sometimes fault lines or breaks, if you will. Like groupers, for instance, travel off Miami in 240 feet. So there's a fault line that runs all the way down in about 1,500 feet deep, and right out front of Alamrod, it's kind of a slope, but down there it's a wall.
What is a fault line before we go?
It's a crack in the earth.
Okay, that's what I thought.
An actual crack. So this is a minor one out here. So anyway, we decide what happened is people around me, employees, everybody else, they say, Richard, you staying up all night. You're not pleasant to be around. So that contributed to it too. So we decided we're going to go try to catch a swordfish in the daytime. So we go out there, we take monofilament line, a big 10-0 reel, loaded up with 80. I decide, listen, we're going to use a concrete block to get this thing to go down because of the current. I said, listen, let me put a snaring device on there. So I used some snag hooks in case he got on there. At least we know they were there. We go out the first time, we drop the thing in the water. It goes down. We're sitting there for hours, and all of a sudden it's heavy. We can't reel it up. So we hand lined the damn thing up. They wanted to just cut the line and go. And when we got it to the surface, there was a 60-pound swordfish wrapped up.
You hand line 1,500 feet.
Yeah, because you got monofilament line,
Wow.
a concrete cinder block, and a swordfish hanging on there. Which is, because we're trying to figure this out.
Sure,
We know what to do.
That's the ultimate yo-yo catch.
Yes. But now this, what ends up happening, I spent 13, 14 years down in Mexico fly fishing for sailfish. So when I was down there, I also figured out a lot about strip baits, which I learned from Buddy Carey on Pier 5, because that's what they used to drag for sailfish there. And I knew how to cut a strip out of a bonita or what have you. So the long and short is, the first thing we figured out was they had come out with Power Pro, or if you will, the high-tech, lines, braided line. Well, there's an exponential relationship. When you drop line out there in the Gulf Stream, it's running 3 knots at this time. And when you drop mono, it's 5 times the size.
There's too much drag.
80-pound mono is 5 times the size of 80-pound Power Pro, or fuel braided line.
So the braid cuts right through the water.
Exactly. It stems it because, again, that exponential relationship caused it. So we couldn't hold bottom with the mono. So we got the braided line involved. Guys started making lights that would tolerate the 1,500-foot depth. So I came up with, I did not want, and I would not and never have caught a swordfish on an electric reel.
To this day.
To this day. Okay, and I won't. And my son will, and he does. But anyway, if I'm going to do it, I wanted to do it as sport fishing, and I did. I used fighting chairs. So I had to figure out a way to deploy the bait. So what I did is I had guys that worked for me. This used to be a big storage barn, in and out storage. And I had them build a mold, and I made my own weight out of concrete with flat surfaces. So when you dropped it down, you couldn't pull it up. And I took a tippet like you use in tarpon fishing, okay? And I took that tippet, and I'd use 12 to 15 to 20, depending on the current and the wind. And I would splice it into a long leader, and I would hang the weight on there. So we throw the weight in, pull away, drop it down, angle away. Now, when the fish bit, you see this, you pull away, and you pop the weight off, and now it's just you and the fish. This sounds easy, but it wasn't easy. It took a lot of innovation, and it came from my days at Pier 5, from my fly fishing, from Mexico.
From Venezuela?
You took all your knowledge and applied it into this one.
Yes. And so we were starting to fish for swordfish in the daytime. I have a book here, like this book, and this book is
Look at all those big fish.
well, I have hundreds. Okay, just that's all swordfish. Okay, I didn't want anybody to know this. I really didn't, and I didn't let them know. So for 2 years I went out there, obsessed, and I probably caught 200 swordfish before people knew about it.
Well, what would you do to the swordfish? How would they not know when you came in at 3 and you had a big old fish in the back of your
That's
boat?
an interesting story. We released some, and we killed them. They were big. What was interesting, we found out the swordfish during the daytime were 3 times the size of the ones at night.
Why was that?
Was that?
They
Yeah.
live on the bottom, the spawning fish. What we also figured out is that squid spawn in 1,500 feet of water.
But those spawning fish don't come up in the water column at night?
Some do, but very few. Okay. So what I did, I had my brother involved. I had a license, which we still have. I had mates on the boat, and it became pretty costly running that big boat out there fishing for swordfish 3 days a week. I bought a second boat called the B&M, which is still here, that I ran myself. And when I tell you I was obsessed, I was obsessed. And let me tell you a few little things about sword fishing. Number one, if you go back before the nighttime discovery, there had only been 100 swordfish caught on rod and reel by anglers, period. Okay. The guy who really popularized swordfish was a guy named Zhang Gray.
Mm-hmm.
If you know a little bit about him, 1929, he actually bought a schooner and sailed out of the West Coast and went to New Zealand to catch the first 1,000-pound marlin.
Right.
It took him.
He wrote a book, Swordfish and Tuna,
Yeah.
when he was over in Southern California, out at
Right.
Catalina Island.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I read that book. It's fascinating.
Well, he was as many people are. He's
But they're
Bit of a-
spearing a lot of them too, right?
well. They harpooned swordfish for years. That's
Yeah.
commercially what they did. But it took him 4 years to catch 4 sword. It took him a year to catch 4 one time. He actually worked out and lifted weights and everything. A woman caught a 400-pounder in his club. He quit the club because of it. He said it couldn't be done. But anyway, this is Zhang Gray, and this
Right.
is where this comes from. The first, there were no images because when Zhang Gray was fishing for him, there were so few anglers that had caught him, and nobody had a camera. Swordfish are not like marlin. When a swordfish jumps, the line could be here. He's over there somewhere, and he only jumps sometimes once. They're not like tail walking sailfish and what have you. One of the things, let me see here, that I was able to do, and I have lots of them, was capture images of swordfish jumping during the daytime.
Wow.
Nobody'd ever seen this. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
So I was, I honestly believed that my obsession with bonefish was taken away again because of deterioration of the habitat, overfishing, and other things. Okay. So somehow or another at this age, when I was there, 2003 to whenever, I was able to reinvent myself in a swordfish world. What ended up happening? I had a friend named Andy Hahn. I loved Andy dearly. And Andy, I caught him his first blue marlin, his first bonefish and tarpon. And he developed ALS. And at that time, I was walking on a walker, still writing. And they got a hold of me from Sport Fishing Magazine, and Andy was writing for him. And I said, I'll do this. You let Andy come down and catch a swordfish, and I'll go public. So I did. So right here, it says Swordfish Shocker.
So that was the first article.
That was when it started. And Andy caught his swordfish. I have a picture of him with it. He's long since passed.
Was that hard for you to keep that secret? For
Yeah,
all those
yeah,
years?
it was.
Because now all of a sudden
yeah.
you're whacking big ones in the
Yeah,
middle of
it
the
was.
day.
What I was doing is bringing them in and
Swapping boats.
letting my brother take them down and sell them in Key West with our commercial license, so
Right.
they didn't know where they were coming from.
Right. So they probably thought you were a terrible fisherman coming back at the end of the day with no fish.
Yeah.
Meanwhile,
well,
you were
no,
whacking
they,
monsters.
the word was getting out. The word was getting out. But even if Alex Adler was he got me. He had a guy down there with a big boat and the radar and all, and they zeroed in on me. They were going to get me one way or the other, but I kept it secret for a long time. I had a lot of fun with this.
So tell me, when you get out there, where do you go? How do you do what you do?
I mean, for swordfish?
Yeah, I mean, is there certain depths that you target?
Well,
You drift to the north with the current?
Yeah, well, all right. Let me tell you. You remember I told you how we caught the first one, and we had a general idea where to go because we had fished at night, and also we had this map that showed this interesting break, and sure enough, that's where all the bait is. So what you do is the current. Now I'm gonna tell you something else that's interesting. When I started fishing for swordfish, it took 12 to 14 pounds, sometimes more, to hold the bottom.
To get the bait down.
Yes, to hold the bottom because you don't break it off. And today, because of global warming, I don't care what anybody tells you, you can hold bottom out toward 4 and 5 pounds a lot of days. The current of the Gulf Stream has slowed down in the last 20 years since I started, or 15 years with this swordfish thing. So anyway, you pull. Nicholas does. Nicholas is a lot better at it than I was, by the way. I pull in. I pull down. I go into the current. I let it out slow and at an angle, and the boat gets away, and you kind of back up to it. And hang on a second. In 19 whatever this was, you're involved with the IGFA, right?
I am.
This was a real privilege for me too. In this year here. I was one of the few people that they actually came down. There's a really interesting man I love named Adrian Gray.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't remember the other. Don't repeat this. I don't remember the other guys' names. But the IGFA actually
Profiled you.
did the whole. Well, they put the whole thing how to do it.
Right.
Everything was in that article. So, everything from bait rigging to lines to what went on. But I considered that a real honor to be in that particular book.
For sure.
For that kind of thing. So anyway, I had my 15 years of sword fishing. This is the biggest one I ever caught.
How big was that?
Well, we brought it in. We tried to weigh it. We have a telephone pole with a scale. We got it up there, and the pole broke. And so we had to put it in a truck and drive it to the weigh station. My son is an interesting character. He is like my dad, incapable of exaggerating, lying, or anything like that. I am not that person. I can exaggerate. So anyway, I never got an accurate weight, but that fish is, at least we called it 468, but it's close to 500. My son has since beat that to death.
What's Nick's biggest?
You see that mammoth thing over there? 757 pounds.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, Nick.
And that was last year.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
What does he do differently than how you were fishing? What does he tell you?
Yeah, I've never fished much. I've never fished on that boat for swordfish. Nick rode along with me the whole time. He's a little kid, growing up. He was part of this whole deal. Nick is he fishes more than one line, which helps. He uses electric reel. However, if a guy gets on there and wants to stand up, he's good with stand up.
Right.
He does it the way the party wants.
So if you're fishing rod and reel, traditional way, the standard way is one rod.
Yeah.
And when you're electric fishing, you can fish two.
Some people can, but you can get them tangled up. You got to
Sure.
be good at what Nick fishes 3 sometimes.
Does he?
Yeah, he fishes buoys and most of the stuff again. I
got a quick question for you. So the IGFA is going through this assessment with swordfish and deep dropping, as whether or not it's legal to use an electric reel to deploy the bait and to retrieve a bait that's unfishable. So let's just say you want to change your bait or change a location. So if you want to run 10 miles, it takes a long time to crank 1,700 feet a line back up into the reel. So you can use that electric reel to get your baits up to move. And you can use that electric reel to get it down. And then once it's down, you can fish legally for a record. And once that bait has been fished or you want to leave, now that bait is no longer available to be touched by a fish. So if you all of a sudden you hit the retrieve button and the bait's coming in and you get a bite, that fish does not count.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Too much gray?
Something. Remember I showed you this picture right there.
Yeah.
I'm old school.
Yeah.
And I just
I understand.
Commercial
It
fishing
says it all right there.
Commercial fishing has outstripped the ability for our fisheries to be sustainable. And the reason I tell people, and it's true, I just quit sword fishing. You ever see Forrest Gump? We just walked away.
Right.
I walked away, and I walked away because They were using harpoons. They were using electric reels. There were things going on that I didn't like, and I was done. But I'm not going to judge these people that are out there today.
Right.
My son, he's caught plenty of fish the right way, what I call the right way,
Sure.
IGFA approved, and he catches plenty with the electric. But I will tell you this: I told you before, I'm a boat driver and I take people fishing. I've never seen a person get off a Nick's boat that wasn't happy.
Right.
Because he's that person.
Sure.
So, I don't want to get into the debates. Remember I told you, that's me. That's when I was a wreck fisherman, those were all groupers and things like that,
Now, do you influence?
Here, that's me. Those are mutton snappers. Things
I mean, you look at all these dead fish.
Yeah, I killed a lot of fish.
And typically now, you got a big Marina, 45 captains. Do you try to influence catch and release?
Absolutely.
Because I know a lot of people, when they want to go dolphin fishing, let's just say hypothetically you have 6 people in the boat, the limit's 10. They bring back, 60 dolphin. It's like, why don't you just bring back what you're going to eat and release all these other fish?
Yeah.
So instead of bringing back, fish boxes full of fish, bring back 1 or 2. Is that catching on with all the marinas up and down
Absolutely.
the Keys?
Yeah, it's, what you're looking at here. This is myself, Alex Adler is in this picture. He's 13 years old. Every one of them mutton snappers weighs 15 pounds. Those fish were caught during what we call a spawning aggregation.
Right. That should be protected.
They should protect and Goliath groupers do it. Cabera snappers do it. Nassau groupers do it. They should not be fished.
During that period of time.
Yeah. I don't bottom fish. I don't kill fish. I won't kill any fish in the backcountry. I always say, I hope fish don't have souls because I killed my share. But when I was young growing up, we never even thought about conservation.
Right. It was so plentiful.
Yeah. So, it's kind of hard for me, to judge people now. And
right.
because again, I was, I commercial fished, did all these things. Believe it or not, if 20 years ago, the way things were going, I would have thought we wouldn't have any fish left. But believe me, between bag limits, size limits, closed seasons, educated anglers, we are doing better than I ever thought we would do. Okay, and especially in shallow water. Like, I'm going to give you an example. There was a time when, as a boat captain, myself and all these boat captains here, we made a fortune mounting fish. Okay, there was a big lie there.
Right.
Boat captains in the old days lied to people telling you're going to get the exact fish. Well, that's not true. So we had to make a decision. Since that decision was made, which was 35 years ago, you've never seen a dead tarpon or a dead sailfish. You've never seen a dead bonefish, anything on this dock.
Is there a rule among the marina here? You're not allowed to bring a sailfish in?
I would get very upset if that happened. But understand something. The mount commission on a sailfish would be $500 today. There's nobody here killed a sailfish. So yeah, you asked me, are we doing good? We're doing good. The problem, I don't want to get into this. You've heard me mention this. The biggest problem I've ever experienced, and it's political, was Isla Morada's and the Florida Keys' failure to enact sewering up and down the Florida Keys. And cesspools, septics, drain fields, leaching, the growth of algae that don't belong here. I watched it happen. I watched this community fight back and forth. I watched the federal government fail, the Keys fail. They should have had this done 25 years ago. They finally now just got it done. There's some interesting things that have happened here. The sewering's not 100%, but it's getting close. I told you I bonefish all the time. I go 4 afternoons a week.
Still.
Yeah, I average 5, 6, sometimes 10 bonefish an afternoon. They're coming back. They're not as big.
But they're here.
I'm going to tell you another story. You remember Hurricane Irma?
Yeah.
Which did $1.5 million
Sure.
damage to this marina, uninsured. I won't forget that. You know what happened after that? The year before Irma, dead boating the way I do for bonefish, I never caught a permit staked up. I have caught 40 staked up for bonefish. I'd count them since Irma. okay, this is what happened. The combination of no sewering, Irma comes and emulsifies it. I don't know how far down the toxins go in our bay bottom or the floor, but it flushed them. I was concerned it flushed so much and so rapidly it might completely overwhelm the bay and kill everything. It didn't. So right now, oh man, we're not having algae blooms. The water's a greenish color, but it's tolerable for fish like bonefish. And again, I hate getting into these subjects, but you got me in it now. So yeah, if the government wakes up, you see what's going on in Miami right now, with the soaring problems there. We need to protect this habitat. If we protect the habitat, we can get our fisheries back. And there are some things that are managed well. Yellowtail is one that they've seemed to have done well with. They seem to be inexhaustible. Mangrove snappers, inexhaustible. Mackerel, without Florida Sportsman and what they did in taking the netting out of the bay, you can catch all the mackerel you want. You couldn't have caught one before the netting ban.
Right.
So
we're on the right track.
It's exactly. It's not perfect, but there's hope. I got 2 little grandsons and going to have 2 little granddaughters, and I want them to be able to experience fishing as well. And it's good.
Well, thank you for your story.
Okay.
You are a huge legend.
That's nice.
We could do 5 podcasts with you, but thank you for your time.
Yeah.
You were awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's an interesting story. Your life from being a child up in Miami, growing up with Steve Huff, to becoming the legend you are as Steve Huff, too. You've come full circle.
I guess we're getting near the end, but that's pretty much the swordfish story. I want to tell you 2 more little things.
Sure.
Yeah, 2 more things. The first one was I told you a story about my grandfather and catching my first fish and how he was my person that I fished with all my life. And this is funny. He made me get an education, become an accountant. My grandfather was in a hospital in Queenie Towers in St. Louis, Missouri, dying, and he had a tube in his throat, tracheotomy. He couldn't talk. I had sat for the CPA exam, was with this accounting firm, and I went up there. And I walked into his room, and I got heartbroken as I was. And I said to him, "Grandpa, I'm an accountant with a CPA firm." And he picked up a blackboard, and he wrote on there, "Why the hell do you want to do that?" I don't know if this is going to resonate with you, but my grandfather set me free. He made me get the education, but when he wrote those words, it gave me the
confirmation,
the freedom to chase your
freedom
dreams.
and to go out, and I did. I bought a rundown bar with help from my father, made it successful, was able to work my way into buying a charter boat, and I told you how I got that. But that was one of the moments of my life I will always remember, as Grandpa set me free. The other moment, and this is very important to me, Nick was at the University of Miami. Property values had shot through the roof. And there's an article right here in the Miami Herald, and I'm standing on the front there. And I had people come to me and offer me an astronomical sum of money for this property. So I said, I'm going to let them put this thing together. So they put this package together with the offer, which included some property over next door. And my son Nick came home and got wind of the fact that I was doing this. And he stood in front of me in tears and said, "Dad, how could you think about such a thing? You got 45 boat captains, their families, and 15 employees, and I was born here." And I looked at him, and it's going to make me cry a little bit. And I turned down that money. And it's kind of funny. And I would do it over 1,000 times. And since that, we've had the oil spill in the Gulf. We've had fires at hotels. We've had algae blooms. We've had hurricanes, and things like you can't even imagine the struggle it's been through. But but thank God, that moment happened, and
this is your home.
Exactly, and I'm gonna die here. Yeah, and my son Nick, and you mentioned, I hope you get to meet him. He's special, and my son Ricky. I didn't even get into my Schnook stuff, but I got Schnook stuff too. I mean, he's developed stuff back there nobody knows.
We'll save it for another podcast.
Okay,
We'd love to do it.
I'm sorry to
No,
to
it's
go on,
perfect.
but,
It's perfect.
well, thank you. I'll say one last word. My wife just today she was diagnosed with breast cancer, just had a mastectomy. And today, 1 hour before I came here, she got the word it didn't spread. She's going to get reconstructed, and
Yahoo!
I came here and was able to
That's
talk
such
to you
great
guys. So
news.
Yahoo!
I'm a little emotional.
Well,
I'm having
congrats.
a tough time with this.
Well,
but,
thank
yeah,
you,
my
Richard,
pleasure.
so much. And
Wonderful. It's
That's
an
such-
honor
And
and
her
a
name is
such great
privilege.
Joanne,
news.
by the way. I
Well,
want that in there.
hallelujah.
Thank you, sir. It's
Thank
a
you.
privilege. I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean that.
Us too.
Okay.
All right.
When I saw his West Side Story.